In this edition of Karhu Academy, we're going to talk about some muscle-up stuff. I do want to continue the inversion series that we've been working on. So we went through getting comfortable upside down, we went through handstand push-ups, and it will end with handstand walking and handstand balance. But I wanted to take a step back from that because the next Karhu Academy seminar is going to cover muscle-ups. And so what I wanted to do is I'll have a video teaching the muscle up, but I first wanted to go ahead and address some of the most common faults for those that are struggling with kind of getting that last piece of their muscle up. So today that's what we're going to be talking about, most common muscle up faults. And what I see those faults coming into two things. Usually it happens in the kip and it happens in the transition. So at this point you probably already have a chest to bar pull up, you probably have a ring dip. So chest to bar pull up to ensure that you have the strength to get to the transition, and then the ring dip to make sure that you can get out of the transition. So what I want to address first is the kip, and on the kip what I see is that people are not being aggressive enough. So in that kip you want to think about this is your loading of the hips, right? So we want to use the hips to make sure that we don't have to struggle using all of our upper body, getting fatigued, because the more tired you get with the muscle up, or if you have a muscle up in a workout, requires a lot of upper body if you can't figure out how to use the hips properly. And so one of those is loading the hips. So when you start, you want to think about making the biggest Superman possible. Okay, so what that looks like, so that backswing, I'm loading the hips to get ready for that aggressive tap swing and to finish the kip with a hollow body position at the top. So hollow body position at the top with the elbows, since you're starting that pull, with your elbows 90-degree angle with the bottom of the rings, ideally hitting somewhere between bottom of the rib cage and top of the hip bone. Again, when you're in that hollow body position, you want to make sure that your toes are in front of you and that your hips are in a neutral position and they're not dropped at the top of that position. So what that looks like for hollow body, so that is your aggressive kip. Okay, so big Superman, nice hollow body at the top with elbows coming to a 90-degree angle in between rib cage and top of the hip bone. Next piece, the transition. So in the transition, there are a lot. Okay, so the transition is kind of that key portion to getting a muscle up, and so this is where I see a lot of things happening. And so some of the things that I want to address that I see most commonly, pulling too early. So what happens here is if you start to kip and you decide you want to pull a little bit early, you're not patient, what you're doing here is you're cutting the kip short and you're taking your hips out of the equation. So now you've got to try to figure out how you're going to muscle up through that getting into the transition. Next is coming through, and these kind of go together here, coming through the rings. So through the middle of the rings versus over the top. So here it tends to look, when you come through the rings, and I'll show that here in a little bit, it's more of a pull-up versus trying to get over the top to set yourself up in that bottom of that ring dip position. So what that looks like for athletes that tend to pull too early, okay. So that's the pull too early. So notice that as I kip, I start to drop my feet, drop my legs, everything comes in, and it becomes a pull-up at that point. Fix that real quick. All right. So your goal here is that you should come over the top of the ring. So as you transition, you want to think about shoulders on top of the rings. Okay. So what that looks like. Okay. So notice that I'm coming over the top and around versus shooting myself up through the middle. So again, one more time. Right, those just don't want to stay up. That's all right. All right, so pulling too early. coming through the rings versus over the top. Next one is not following through with the elbows. So this is one of the biggest ones that I'm starting to see or recognize more, because people are getting really close. They've got a really solid kip. They have a really aggressive, or trying to get an aggressive head through the top of the rings. But what happens here is that when you don't follow through with the elbows, you can't get into the top of the ring dips, okay? So I'll show you what that looks like, and then I'll talk a little bit more on that. So if you can on here, kind of look at where my elbows are in the first one to where I'm trying to transition, and then look at it in the second one and notice how early I start to pull at the beginning. Okay? So in the first one, as I went to transition, I threw my head through. I attempted at getting my shoulders over, but my elbows stayed down. Okay, so what happens is in the transition, right when you hit that hollow body position and you start to throw your head through, you have to go ahead and start pulling up on those elbows. So this happens during the start of the transition. If you miss it from the beginning, there's no way to recover that. So it has to happen immediately, and this is why I think it's tricky, because you're pulling, you're thinking about your head coming through, and now you have to think about your elbows. So there's a lot of things happening at once with that transition. So if you notice in the second one, you can, I don't know if we can get a slow-mo on that somehow, but you try to slow it down, but when you kip and you drive through, your elbows start to transition at the same time that your head and shoulders are moving through over the top of the rings. All right, so next piece, wrists remain in extension. These two also kind of go hand in hand. If your wrists remain in extension, and what that looks like from here is as I transition, I throw everything forward. I'm trying to pull my elbows up, and they're attempting, but my wrist here is an extension versus stacking and coming over the top of the rings in order to hit that bottom of the ring dip position. And so a lot of times when people are missing and trying to drive their elbows up because they understand that piece, but they aren't able to get out of that extension. So in that piece, again, what that looks like for some of you athletes, here focusing on the wrist. Okay. That also usually happens with a turnout. So people turn their wrists out versus keeping them facing each other. So again, as you're driving, pulling the elbows, you want to make sure that the wrists are facing each other, facing the body, and that you're not trying to turn them out during that transition. And then of course the last piece, what I always say about every gymnastics movement, is you've got to be aggressive. So you have to be aggressive with the kip, you have to be aggressive with the transition. Okay? Everything you do, just like all the barbell movements, is very aggressive, except in the world of gymnastics, we add a little bit of finesse that makes it look elegant and simple. So those are some of the common faults that I see in the muscle up. Next video, before the seminar, I will address the muscle up. So we'll actually go through and I will walk you through and teach you how to do the muscle up. Again, email me, jessica@karhustrength.com. If you have a muscle up video that you want to send me, I'd be happy to take a look and give you any feedback on that. So any questions, comments, concerns, jessica@karhustrength.com.